Hello, people. How you doing? I'm Lee Cole. I'm here with my partner, James Proctor, and my good friend. And also today we have Jeff Canarsie joining us. And let me tell you why Jeff's here. And James, just so you know, to me, no one knows as much about Philadelphia. And I never gave Jeff his due because I knew nothing about Philadelphia. Once I started studying it, I'm like, wow, Philadelphia is one exciting city when it comes to the mob for the last 40 years. What would you say, James?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's when you look at the south side of Philly, it's not necessarily a big area, but it's almost like how Bensonhurst was back in the day. It's just to me amazing to see the amount of mob guys. But then when looking at Joey Merlino, you look at all of these photos of these guys like when he was a kid or a teenager, and these guys ended up growing up with him and then later was part of that life. And it's just amazing seeing you had very capable fathers, but you had very capable sons as well. You don't always see that. A lot of times in other families, it's, maybe the father was strong, but then the son wasn't quite at the same level. But in Philly, a lot of these guys, they were both father and son, very vicious.
And Jeff, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. And what do you think about what James just said about the father son?
He's right about that. I mean, you're realistically, when you look at Philadelphia, you're talking about 12 square blocks of mayhem. And historically, like I always say on my podcast and on my show, that the reality about Philadelphia is history always repeats itself. And if you look at Philadelphia going back to like 31, right after Salvatore Sabella retires, you have John Avena and Joe Dovey. They go to war for control of the mob for 5 years, shooting each other. And it was in, I think, 1936. I could be wrong about the year. John Avena gets shot in a drive-by for control of the mob. So even if you go to the 50s when Joe Ida, and this is like pre-Bruno, the Genovese crime family, even back then, is pushing for control of Philadelphia. And it's not until 1956 that Philadelphia becomes its own mob family. Before, they were independent, right? Mm-hmm. But if you go back just to the early days, they're fighting over 5 square blocks.
Yeah.
Bosses are killing bosses. He was the first actual boss in Philadelphia to ever be murdered. But if you look at his history, Bruno, Testa, and it just keeps going. And Stanfa almost was killed. So there's something in the water there, they just like to take control.
Yeah.
How valuable when the wars first started? You're talking about 5 blocks. We're talking about before they expanded to New Jersey, to Atlantic City. So how valuable were those 5 blocks? Why were they so valuable to these guys?
Well, it sounds like an old adage, but it's narcotics. Everybody wanted to be in the narcotics racket, and that's what people misunderstand about Philadelphia, is because you have all 5 families represented in New Jersey itself. When you're in such a small radius, and just a quick comparison, take the Genovese crime family, right? They got their hands in 70, 80, 90, 100 rackets. But when you take a crime family and put them in Philadelphia, and then surrounding them is New York, you're all fighting over the same breadcrumbs, essentially. And that's why you're seeing guys getting shot and killed, because everybody wants more than they're getting.
And Jeff, when did some guys in Philadelphia say, you know what, this thing up in Atlantic City looks pretty good, let's go up there and get involved?
Well, originally, that is really what New York wanted a cut of. And Bruno was absolutely against it. He let them sell drugs in Cherry Hill, but he did not want them going near Atlantic City, because the rule basically became Chicago can take over Vegas, but they're not allowed to come east to Atlantic City. And because they couldn't get what they wanted out of Bruno, they kind of needed somebody that was willing to give them a little parlay into Atlantic City. And the only one that was willing to do that was Nikki Scarfo. And that's kind of moving ahead a couple of decades.
Right.
That's the reason why Chin backed Nikki Scarfo originally, because he made overtures that they could get into Atlantic City, but then, Scarfo goes berserk and Chin wants nothing to do with him. Then John Gotti steps in.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry. James, you got the next question, I promise. I just want to get back to Bruno. So you got Bruno there, and Bruno decides, okay, he wants to. He's the one basically that really wanted to get into Atlantic City. The guy's doing a good job running the city. I mean, he has a fist down on the city for how long did he control the city?
It's 30 years.
30. And when do you think they decided? Now he was in his 70s, and they decided to take him out. How do you think that whole? Describe to us why you think that whole thing took place, where they wanted to take Bruno out after he's been there all these years doing his job.
They saw him as giving up turf to New York crime families as an insult. Like, how do you tell somebody who's a cook, you're not allowed to cook in your own city, right? So when drugs was the big thing, especially meth back in the day, a lot of the guys wanted to get into the meth trade, and Bruno said, absolutely not. You're not getting involved in drugs. But yet he allows the Gambinos to sell drugs in their turf, and he's taking a cut. So how can you tell your own men they can't do it, but you're going to be subservient to another crime family in your own turf? It's sort of like, are you with us or are you with them? And I think that's a part of it. Plus, he was getting indicted a lot. There was a series of indictments that were coming down, and they just got to the point where I think they wanted to earn money. You know, you can listen, we can all bullshit the people that watch our shows, but drugs is the biggest moneymaker for the mob. The reality is that they'll take the profits. They don't want to know where it comes from, but they don't want to know where the money, they don't want to know who's making what and where. They'll take the money. But if you tell them you're selling drugs, it's a problem. But really for Bruno, it became sort of like a Paul Castellano issue, greed. They saw him as not allowing them to make money, but yet you're going to take a kickback from the Gambinos, but we can't earn. So I think that's what it came down to.
James, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let's step it back to discussion on Atlantic City. And so just wanted to see if this is your opinion. So, Nikki Scarfo, we're looking in the mid 1960s. So my understanding was that Bruno wasn't really that crazy about Scarfo, and it was kind of an exile per se into Atlantic City, and that no one thought at that time that Atlantic City was going to be anything, because you remember how bad it was in the late 60s. Crime, it was just, it was a dying city. And then in the mid 70s, the New Jersey legislature allowed gambling to occur. And then it all of a sudden, nearly overnight, made Atlantic City wealthy. And so I don't think Bruno was expecting Atlantic City to go through that transition where it was a dump to where then it became, the version of Las Vegas on the East Coast. So I was just curious of your thoughts on that transition.
Well, there were two things about Nikki. Number one, Rugnetta wanted Nikki to marry his daughter.
Yeah.
And Nikki, kind of being the nonchalant guy that he is, said, I wouldn't marry her. She's an ugly this, that. Are you kidding me? That's the first thing that started the problems. The second thing was he stabbed a longshoreman to death in a diner over his seat. And that's what gets him thrown out. And he was basically sent there to die, to wither, because there was nothing. There was literally nothing. Now Nikki started loan sharking, but there was nothing. He's sent out there to sort of wither away, put him out to pasture, put the horse out to pasture. Because Atlantic City was a slum, and it still is. Even you go 3 blocks outside of Atlantic City now, it's still a crack den. I don't know if Bruno had the foresight to understand how much money was going to be involved,
Right.
And I think had he seen sort of the evolvement like Vegas, I think he might have been more prone to just let guys do certain things, but no, didn't work that way.
Yeah. And I know that's kind of how the families, it seemed like, that's why it was so important for these families. They wanted a piece of that. And so Bruno, you have to give Bruno credit for being able to keep New York from actually getting in there. They could have taken that over, but that didn't happen. Obviously, we know at the end it cost him his life, but it's just interesting dynamics of how this whole thing with Atlantic City, I think, changed the dynamics of Philly and New York.
I think if Carlo Gambino had still been alive, they would have gotten a cut of that. 100%.
Yeah, that was his advocate. They were
absolutely
close.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So who sits down one day and they say, okay, we want him gone. We want Bruno gone. Because from what I understand, John Stanfa just recently became his driver. And that's another question. When they hit him, do you think Stanfa was involved?
100%.
Because he was in the car and Stanfa got wounded, I believe, but they went to see him the next day in the hospital.
You have to ask yourself, why did the Gambinos hide him out after that?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? He had a lot of contacts within the Gambino crime family, but he just is hidden by them in DC and some other areas. Like, why are the Gambinos going to protect him if he's done nothing? But going back to the Bruno thing, that is a whole entire setup from Antonio Caponegro and Funzi Thierry, because they had been beefing for years, and Caponegro ends up winning sort of a sit down over Thierry, and Thierry never forgot it. So when Caponegro calls Thierry with the idea of, hey, we're going to kill Bruno, he lies to him and says, it's green lit, go ahead and do it. Yeah. So when they do it, Caponegro gets sent for. He comes to New York and he watches. Imagine yourself being the guy that pulled this off, and you're sitting next to Thierry in a commission meeting, and Thierry denies ever telling you that you could do that. Ultimate betrayal, because who takes over Caponegro's rackets after that? Thierry.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, because he wanted in there in Jersey. Yeah.
100%.
So they called him in New York okay, first of all, the one thing about the Bruno hit, it's one of the greatest classic hit pictures you'll ever see. I mean, here's this old man in a car, his mouth wide open. They shot him in the mouth, and it's a horrible picture. Unfortunately, we can't show those pictures here because then we won't be monetized. And believe me, I would love to show those pictures because it kind of gives you an idea of the violence. But then you got Caponegro. He thinks it's okay. He goes, so who called him into New York, and what happened to him when he got to New York?
Vinny Gigante called him in, and they never left the meeting alive, and they were found in the Bronx in the trunk of a car.
Him and who else was with him?
Oh God, I'm trying to think.
Not that it matters. All we know is the other guy was in the trunk too.
I can't off the top.
Yeah,
of my head,
I know who it was, but I can't remember now. But
so they kill these two guys, and so at that time, Testa, the Chicken Man, takes over. And how long was he in charge before his fate was sealed, and why did they take him out?
I think about a year, not even. Well, because it's the same. It's the same mentality. I think so. Nikki Scarfo, right after the death of Bruno, Scarfo's offered the position. Now, in the hierarchical chart, it's really not his position to have, but because Gigante wants to back somebody that might give them Atlantic City, they offer it to Nikki, and Nikki says no. And I think a lot of the reason why Nikki says no has nothing to do with the fact that he feels like Testa's the rightful person to take that place. I think he realizes the streets aren't done. And then you have Frank Chicky Narducci, who decides he's going to pull a Caponegro and doesn't get away with it either.
Well, and see, people don't realize that whole thing. Okay, so you have the porch blown up, and they get him out of the way. And as soon as they get him out of the way, who takes over at that point?
After Testa, it would have been Scarfo.
Okay, and so this is his porch. They put a nail bomb on there. The poor bastard has no chance. I mean, look at it. It just blew the floor off the place. But here's the thing: there was a son that had revenge set in the mind, and you got all this betrayal comes up now, and here's where the sons come in, and so the son waited. Well, first let's get back. So we know that that a maniac takes over, And do you think he was crazy right from the very beginning, or do you think he became paranoid, Scarfo, over a period of time?
I think if you kill somebody over a seat in a diner, there's something wrong with you. You know what I mean?
Right.
People forget Nicky was a Brooklyn guy. He wasn't a Philly guy. He was a Brooklyn guy. He was born in Brooklyn. So he had the whole sort of Brooklyn mentality.
But he was a smart guy, though, wasn't he?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, I think he was smart, yeah. But I think he was more of a he sort of imitated John Gotti. He really was, like, people say Joey's the John Gotti of Passyunk Avenue, but Nikki Scarfo was really the John Gotti of South Philadelphia. Absolutely.
Do you think what separated him from Gotti, though, is Gotti had this inner circle around him that protected him, and Gotti never hurt his circle. He never started killing people in his circle.
I think Gotti was a politician. I think he was a better politician. He knew when to ruffle feathers and when not to. And Nicky, you know, the old saying goes, if Nicky had a dream, you were talking to the cops, you were dead 2 days later. You know?
So Narducci takes out, okay, so Narducci is part of the hit on Testa. And it's only a couple years later that Salvi Testa comes for him. Explain what happened there.
Well, it's Salvi. I guess Nicky did not see. This is what's kind of an odd thing, is that, you know, Phil Narducci was in Scarfo's, you know, Phil Narducci was in different crews, but he was with Nikki Scarfo. And the reality is that Scarfo had been kind of keeping Testa back from retribution, but then he finally does, and basically Salvi Testa just walks up to him almost outside of his house and just shoots him something like 9 times in the head.
Yep.
He wanted him to know it was him, didn't he?
100%. 100%.
I'm here to kill you 3 years later. And see, people don't realize this is like just within a couple years of revenge. I mean, it's not like it was 10, 15 years later. You know, this is a young kid coming to get his revenge.
Absolutely.
James?
Yeah, and then when you look at Phil Testa, and I meant to ask this earlier while we were on the subject. So, you know, there was this whole conspiracy against the Chicken Man, and so we know that Narducci was involved. And then, so where does this whole thing with Johnny Keys come from? What's real? What's not in that? Was he, you know, I've heard he was related to Bruno. Yeah, I'd heard too that maybe he was against Bruno, but, you know, I don't think there's a lot of evidence on that except hearsay. But obviously, you know, he wasn't was happy about, you know, what the events that transpired. So was he really a major player in this?
Oh, no, he was, but I think more so than anything, anybody that shows any sort of moxie that they're going to try to do something, that's just the way Philly operates for some reason. I've never understood it. But a lot of that has to do with anybody that poses a threat needed to go. And
did they share Trenton? Wasn't it? Didn't he share Trenton with either Genovese or Gambinos?
Yes. Yeah. And I think anybody that has powerful friends, or they have certain acquaintances with other families, that could be a problem for somebody down the line. And I think that's, if you look at the history of the 90s in Philly, 81 to 93, just the amount of murders is staggering down there. And a lot of it's just because they're not going to tolerate anybody trying to take what they think is theirs.
But it didn't seem like it was a proxy war between, it was like a Cold War between the Genovese and Gambinos, and it happened to be that Philly was in the middle of it, because it seemed like,
Yep, absolutely.
And now Johnny Keys, he was one of the guys the following day that went to visit in the hospital, Stanfa. So it's obvious that Johnny Keys had quite an influence at that time.
Absolutely.
But as we all know, Sammy Gravano made the Johnny Keys story. No one even knew who Keys was,
right,
unless you were a Philly guy. Then he's brought to mythological levels by Leonetti in the book talks about it. and so does Sammy Gravano. How much of that Sammy Gravano story do you think is true?
0%.
And tell me why.
Because if you really think about it, why would of all people on earth, why would Sammy be involved in any of that? That's the thing that always, like, if you think about John Gotti and who he was, right? And you think of Sammy and who he was, say, prior to Frankie DeChico, Sammy was nobody.
Right. We're talking 1980 and
Right.
81. Yeah.
Right. So why of all people is he being sent? Why is
They would
he
send
nobody?
Carniglia. They would send Carniglia.
Right.
Someone like
Carrazzo, you could send one of a million different people. Why
and I thought he was upset. I thought Castellano was also upset. That was about the time of the Plaza Suites thing. And my understanding was killing that guy, for whatever his name was that ran it. That didn't sit well with Paul Castellano. It brought a lot of attention. And, I think that Casso was able to get the cops to kind of go away from it. But, I'm not sure how much of a positive vibe that Castellano had with Sammy.
I can't speak to their relationship. I think there's a lot of stuff about Castellano that people don't want to give into, if that makes kind of sense. Like, was he a gangster? Yeah. Was he a tough guy? You better believe it. But was he greedy? Was he greedy? 100%.
He killed a lot of guys.
Right.
He sent a lot of guys to be murdered.
And one thing that people don't realize, not to bring up John Gotti, but a lot of people don't realize is that Paul was doing his thing, puts Neil in charge of the streets, but then Neil's not going to oversee the day-to-day. So who does he put in the day-to-day operations? John Gotti. A lot of people don't know, since the 70s, John Gotti was actively running things.
Yeah.
So this sort of mysterious, John Gotti was just a captain, then all of a sudden becomes the boss, isn't exactly the way it went. But I've got something coming out on that, not to toot my own horn, but
let me ask you something. So they decided to take Keys out.
Yep.
And Leonetti, another liar and a rat.
Oh, yeah.
He basically backed Sammy's story. It's obvious they talked. So if you had to say, Jeff Canarsie, you understand these guys inside out. Who do you think was sent there to take out Keith?
Oh, I don't know. The list would be so long.
And Sammy wouldn't be on that list, would he?
Why would you need to do that? I mean, that makes no sense to me. Him of all people, there's like a million other guys. There's Camorra guys in North Jersey you could get to do that. You don't need to go to the Gambinos to do that. And also the thing with Leonetti as well is I've always been a firm believer in when Scarfo turns on Testa had everything to do with Leonetti. It had very little to do with Nikki. I mean, Nikki was crazy, right? But who gains the most if Testa dies? Who gains the most out of that?
Leonetti does, yeah.
Right, he talks all of this stuff about, he's my best friend. He's my best friend. But come on, he needled Nikki saying, look, this guy's getting all the press. It's not a good thing for you. 100%, I think Leonetti had designs on taking over the family for himself.
Yeah.
Do you think that Testa was planning on making a run at taking over?
No.
Are you talking about Leonetti or Testa? Testa.
Because they took him out of jealousy.
You're talking about Salvi Testa.
Salvi Testa, yes.
Okay.
So
I don't think so, because I don't think the old guard would have backed him. He was a young guy, a good-looking guy, was capable, made a lot of money, dangerous, but you had some other guys, Nicky the Crow, Tommy Del Giorno. Those were guys that were higher up on the totem pole, and I just don't see them sort of backing a young guy like that. But I could be wrong.
No. Okay. So we're here. We talked about Bruno getting killed. Now you have now we know we got Scarfo in power. At that time, how long did Scarfo stay in power?
Well, really until he went to jail, which was in what, 90, 91, 92. I don't know the exact.
Almost 10 years he was
10
in.
years,
I
decade.
think. Yeah.
And how many people do you think that he killed that thought he was a friend, that people he betrayed? Was it a long list of people he betrayed?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, we're never going to know the real number. I mean, we only know what the press reports and
Leonetti's book and all that.
Yeah, and it's not always murder is a mechanism, but it's not always the reason why you think it might be. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's a beef. But with Scarfo, it almost looks like he just didn't like anybody. You know, he was a bit of a fucking nut.
So where was he? Just curious, because up until this point, you always had South Philly is really the center of the Philly mob. Was I'm assuming that Scarfo had to go to South Philly quite a bit, or maybe he had I wouldn't. How did that work? Did he actually kind of run things out of Atlantic City, or did he just go between the two, or how did that work?
He had a place out in Margate area, and then he also had a place in South Philly as well, and he would just go back and forth. But mainly, it depends what year we're talking about, because there was some years, he stayed away, and then other years he was seen there all the time, but mainly back and forth.
I wasn't sure if there was two factions at that point. It was even during the Scarfo years. Did the old guard, the folks from South Philly, look at? I'm assuming they looked at Scarfo as a nut.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I don't know how that worked.
And how important was Chucky Merlino? And this is Joey Merlino's father. How important was Chucky Merlino to Scarfo, and why did Scarfo finally get rid of him?
Scarfo got rid of him because as I don't want to insult Joey, of course, but his father had kind of a drinking thing going on, and there were some things that took place, and so Scarfo demoted him because of it. That's what has always been said, but I also think the fact that Chucky was respected and well liked. This is another guy that could be a problem down the line for Scarfo. So I think Scarfo was really good at utilizing excuses. Like he used the excuse of Sal Testa not marrying Joey's sister as a reason to kill him.
Right.
So that's the reason he gives, but secretly the reason is he doesn't want anybody getting pressed but him. So I think that's another situation where he recognizes something in somebody else that he wants, and it almost becomes a negative attribute. Like, this guy could threaten me, so let me just do this.
Do you believe that Chucky Merlino wanted Sal Testa dead after he did break up with the daughter?
I didn't know Chucky, but from what I've heard, he was not happy about it because he waited till the last minute. Everything had been paid for. I mean, this wasn't like, a month out. This is like weeks away. So do I think he wanted him dead? No, I think just as easily they could have beat him. He could have taken a beating, and that's typically South Philadelphia has two modes. They beat the crap out of you first, and if that's not good enough, then they'll extinguish you. So I don't know.
So Joey Merlino was put between a rock and a hard place with this going on too, because at that time he had a friendship there with Salvi.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joey, if you talk to him, he would probably tell you, listen, that relationships ends, things happen, maybe it was for the best. I don't think Joey would have taken that personally. I really don't. The father, right, maybe a different story. I mean, that's your daughter, and there's the whole, the problem that you have in this lifestyle is you have what they call appearances, and it's how it looks to the people in the streets with you. They don't care about the press. They don't care about book writers. They care about how it looks to men that are their equals.
It looked disrespectful,
right,
to do that at the last minute,
right, if your wife steps out on you, that looks a certain kind of way to guys you're in the streets with, so there's two different angles to that. I don't think Joey cared. I really don't.
And why do you think Testa pulled out of it? Do you think he felt like he was being forced, or he just wanted out?
I don't know. I didn't know either one of them. I couldn't tell you. Maybe he just decided he wanted something else on the side.
So maybe he's guilty of not handling it a little better.
I would agree that he could have handled that respectfully.
Yeah.
Especially with a guy that's that high up on the food chain as a father-in-law. I think there's other ways to handle that. Sure.
And and so he gets so what happens at that point? Chucky winds up going to prison.
Yep.
And he ran over some bikers' foot or something, and it almost started a war between the bikers.
Yeah, he was apparently drinking, and I don't know if this is what's always been said, and that he literally ran over some motorcycles that were parked in the car, just didn't give a shit, kept going. You can ask Joey, but I'm not sure. That's what they've always said.
Okay, James.
Yeah, and then what's interesting too is about bikers and everything. I've noticed that in New York, it's one of these things that there's not much of a relationship between bikers and the Five family. They don't really get along. But it seemed like in Philly, you see more of that relationship between the Philly mob and the bikers. I mean, obviously, the bikers, I believe in the 70s were involved in the meth trade. And so maybe there was a business arrangement but have you noticed that there seems to be some sort of relationship between Philly and different bikers groups like the Pagans, etc.?
Well, you go back to the 90s, right? You had the Junior Black Mafia. You had the K&A gang or whatever, and the bikers. And they were sort of kind of getting along business-wise. What that is today, I'm not sure, but I know in the 90s that was a really big proponent of business. I mean, That only makes sense, right? But once again, I go back to Philadelphia being this small, and you have all of these groups. And so when people that don't understand Philly come out and say, oh, what do they have, 40 guys? How do they make any money? I don't know if the Gambinos, for example, if they had all of those kind of filtered groups around them, would be more successful in that situation either. A lot of it is the Philly mob also does not have control over construction. That's a huge thing. Under Bruno, they did. Under others, they didn't. They lost that. They also lost all the unions.
Yeah.
Scarfo had all the unions. So the minute you lose unions, you're going to lose politicians. You're going to lose paying off cops. You're going to lose construction. What else is left? Drugs.
And Sammy Gravano talks about going down and having meetings with these guys and stuff. Is this more fairy tales by Sammy Gravano?
I think so. Why would they send him to talk to anybody?
About union stuff. That's what Sammy said.
There was a meeting with John Gotti and Nikki Scarfo over I may have told you, Lee, about this. Between Phil Narducci, there was some heat, and there were some words that were exchanged, and John Gotti came down and met, I think, Scarfo in Jersey, and they were talking about what had happened. And John finally at the end of the meeting says, you know what, Nikki, here's the thing. If any of my guys ever step out of line again here, kill them. You don't even have to ask. Just do what you got to do. So Phil Narducci's life gets saved that day because there was a beef between him and a high-powered guy. So why would he have to send Sammy Gravano to talk to anybody? I just think that's nonsense.
And this is where people don't understand. John Gotti had an inner circle it's like policing and these people, they all talk about being around Gotti, but Gotti had this circle around him from the 70s. It always was around him, protecting him. He was always the boss of that group. And so when you hear about these people, oh, I knew Gotti, I was near Gotti, you couldn't get inside that circle, could you, Jeff?
No, I don't think so. And I just... John seemed to be the type of guy, and I could be wrong, that would talk business himself. He doesn't need anybody to speak for him. And you're going to send Sammy to a hotel in the middle of the night to sit down with Nikki Scarfo. That just doesn't pass the sniff test. And I think that a lot of that is Gravano trying to make himself more important to John Gotti than he really was.
Yeah.
He could have sent Bobby Borriello. Would have been the same effect.
Yeah,
I mean?
Yeah, I think that when Frank DeChico was rubbed out, that really affected things, because I think that if Frank DeChico would have remained the underboss, didn't get rubbed out, then that power of Sammy, it wouldn't have happened. I think also that that Frank DeChico was a reason that Sammy was involved in the Castellano hit anyway, and it was Gotti and Gravano really weren't that close. They didn't really know each other that well. But, I think at the same time, Gotti also realized to build a consensus, especially trying to take over a family the way he did, that he had to build that with people like Gravano, Frank DeCicco, and others.
Well, one of the things I always laugh about is Gravano talks about, I got the position because my business acumen is so terrific.
Right.
I'm so good at construction. But yet, if you look at Gem Steel and all of these companies that Sammy absorbed, how did he get them?
Well,
he killed the people that owned them, right? So it's not like Gravano was like a gem, like Gotti finds a gem in Gravano that he's so good at what he does. No, he killed everybody to take their businesses. Like you cannot brag about being a great business investor when you kill the investor and just push a button.
They said Eddie Garofalo was actually really more of an expert in construction than Sammy was.
I heard that Sammy could not nail a nail into the wall.
Right.
His construction acumen. I mean, when he talks about, I got construction, I got rebar. If you look at some of the projects the Gambinos had, they had to be taken down. There was a big scandal because Gravano was putting substandard steel into buildings.
You remember that happened at Gotti's house too. You remember that was part of the issue.
Yeah, he had no idea what he was doing.
Okay, back to Philadelphia. Listen, the amazing thing about Philadelphia, it's like Philly's right here, and you have a million stories surrounding it. It's quite it's unbelievable when you think about it. So now you have what took down Scarfo? What actually took him down and he went away for life?
Murder. So here's the thing, right? So if you have an even keeled boss where what the rules are and if you do certain things, you're going to get killed, right? With Scarfo, there seemed to be no thread line. It was, if you look at guys like Nicky the Crow, Tommy Del Giorno, and I'm not giving an informant any excuse. You know me well enough. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. But when you have a boss that is killing people for no reason, like some guys will sell a drug and he does nothing. Some guy coughs the wrong way and he has his whole family butchered. When you have a boss that is unstable, unpredictable, you scare the shit out of everybody that's underneath of you. So if you're unpredictable and you don't know what's going to happen, that causes guys to become informants because one day you're here, the next day you're not. So I think being not even keeled and almost a psychopath is what created his own demise.
And it's funny you said that, Jeff, because I've done with James and I did a story on Casso, and that's what he started wiping out the Bronx faction. And a lot of those Bronx guys that were old timers started flipping because they were like, we're going to be killed.
Right.
And they did that in Jersey too. It's just, I think that's what ends up happening when people, you operate out of fear. Fear is a motivator and it's needed in that type of life, but but there's rules. And so murder was only based on breaking certain rules, not the way that Scarfo, he felt someone was a threat. So I'm just going to get rid of him,
Yeah. He killed a horse. I mean, who does that?
It's just crazy.
And what murders did they get Scarfo on to put him away?
Oh, God,
we know people flipped on him. First of all, who flipped on Scarfo?
Well, it was Del Giorno and Nicky the Crow Caramondi. There was a whole bunch of them. Right. See, with Philly, it's what's weird is generationally, like looking at the decades, to compare like Joey Merlino for just a second. If you look at all of the informants that took place from I guess Stampa's time period or whatever, it was always guys from the outside that really shouldn't, or it was some guys from the inside. But when you look at Joey's cases, it's always somebody from the outside that doesn't know him, never met him. So it's a weird thing. But going back to Scarfo, a lot of people were talking. I mean, you go back in time, Harry Riccobaney was a rat. A lot of people don't know that, and that was another reason why Scarfo ends up going away is because of the bullshit with Harry Riccobaney and that.
Yeah. And okay, so
And there's
Scarfo,
a guy named looking here, Nicholas Caramondi was
Yeah, Nicky
another
the
one.
Crow. Yeah.
Yeah, Nicky the Crow, and then kind of during that time also Scarfo's son killed himself, and
Yep.
it's just a horrible situation.
What
But yeah,
really I think was the tipping scale was Nicky the Crow went in and tried to shake down a bunch of building inspectors.
exactly.
And he uses Nicky's name to do it, and the guy runs to the feds, and then he starts taping those conversations. And that's a dumb move, because immediately the second a guy walks in and says, okay, you're going to pay us X, Y, and Z, this is for the Scarfo crime family. Well, now you have that RICO racketeering charge. And that's really, and once guys see that, so going back to Nicky the Crow, just really quick, Nicky the Crow, I think, once said in an interview, not that I put any stock into what anybody says, but he said, I got caught threatening this guy using Nicky's name. He's going to kill me, like legitimately. And so that's why he flips, because he knows the end is coming. And anybody that's associated with him is going to get killed too.
So you got Scarfo going to prison now.
Yep.
Okay, and this is where it gets really weird.
Yeah, it does.
It gets weird. A guy named Ralph Natali, a guy that you would never think would even become a boss. So at that time you got a group of guys. You had Joey Merlino, you had Stanfa. I mean, they're all vying for control of the city at this point. How the hell did Ralph Natali get in there?
Well, I think you got to look at Stanfa, right? So Stanfa was a guy from Sicily, okay, and he wanted to run South Philadelphia like Carlo Gambino. He wanted to, like the old Mustache Pete's. The problem is with Philadelphia is most of the Italians in Philadelphia are third, fourth, fifth generations removed from Italy. So the viewpoints and the ideology is totally different, right? So Natali was in prison with Joey, believe it or not.
Right.
And I think Joey saw certain things that he could do or certain things he might have wanted to do. And he needs a guy who can step out front. And that's all it was. All Ralph Natali ever was a front boss.
Yeah.
In all reality. But I honestly, I would have loved to have been sitting at the fucking chow line. And that conversation took place.
Yeah. Cause I mean, I've read his book and it's just a bunch of bullcrap about how he got made and all that. I don't even know if he ever got made. There
are rumors that he never was.
Right. That's what my understanding. He was like involved with with like the nightclubs and bars and was a drug dealer and somehow was in prison with Joey and they became friends. I mean, the guy, I think Joey saw him as someone that had an ego that would definitely be willing to be a front guy, but I don't even know if he was ever made,
Well, and that's what's interesting because at the time Joey wasn't made either. Joey
that's a good point.
Until he gets out of prison. So neither one of them are made, but Philly is one of those places where you see something and you want it, you're just going to go and get it. I mean, Joey came from a long history of organized crime guys. All the guys he grew up around, their fathers were involved in it. So they grew up a certain kind of way. And I think the idea was, well, let's talk Ralph Natali, who does have contacts back in New York, which he did. Let's just use him to start to edge our way in. And then eventually we'll just get rid of him and take over. And that's what they did. That's exactly what they did.
And before Natali came in there, you had Stanfa, right? Is that correct?
Right. Yep.
And so how long was Stanfa in power and how did they finally get him out of the way?
So I think it was just a handful of years, just a handful. His reign was not very long. And a lot of the problem with Stanfa thought, well, if I can't bend them, I'll kill them. And that's not what works in Philadelphia. But Stanfa is actually the one that inducts Joey Merlino into the mafia. And he does that as an olive branch. And the one thing that Stanfa does is he undervalues the young guys in Philly. He doesn't think they have what it takes. But then again, Stanfa was like making guys that weren't even Italian. So It's Stanfa would put anybody around him he could, but he wanted to be like the Carlo Gambino of South Philly.
Well, and that was the problem. He had all these people that flip, all these people that just didn't have any sort of business being in that life. They weren't even Italian, like you said. And then really Stanfa did it to himself. And obviously, you know, once he goes to prison, he can't maintain control. I mean, it's just crazy to me.
I think it was over for Stanfa the day he got shot on the Schuylkill Expressway. It was over then.
Yep.
You know, the fact that he wasn't murdered is one thing, but that sends a very powerful message.
Yep.
And I think he was done then. And a lot of people have always asked, because this may come up, you may get comments of, why did New York not get involved then? Why would they?
They had too much going on themselves, right?
Right. Why are you going to get involved in that mess down there? I mean, they're shooting at each other. No, thank you.
Well, I think Joey Chang being incapacitated was hurt.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that, James. Because I want to bring this in, and that's going to lead to this. Okay, so you have explained to me or to us who the Young Turks were and why they didn't want to listen to Stanfa.
So because I'm friends with half of these guys, I'm not really going to mention their names, but you can look them up and you'll see the names. I think a lot of it is they sat back and they watched how the neighborhood was changing. Because a lot of these guys were bookmaking in Shylock in 12, 13, 14 years old. They grew up. This is all they knew, right? And South Philly is so blue collar. Like most people in South Philly have lived there their whole entire lives. Like a lot of these guys that you read about have never left South Philly. They may head out towards Packer Park and live in a nicer sort of area near the stadium. These guys don't leave. Whereas in New York, all the mob is left the neighborhoods, right? It's a big difference. But I think for them, they learned from watching those before them how to operate. And I think they realized they could seize and have better control. And let's be honest about one thing. Bruno was probably the most peaceful time in South Philadelphia. Then you have, Testa, and then you have all the Narducci stuff, and you have all of that. But do you know in 30 years, it's been quiet in Philadelphia? That says something. So it says something about the leadership, because every leader prior to that, really, other than Bruno, had massive problems. But it's been quiet for 30 years. So I think that they just saw this as, this is our neighborhood. Who the F is this interloper John Stanfa? Who does he think he is? He's not even from here.
Yeah.
What is he doing here? New York sent him there. Who does he think he is? I think it's just a system of guys from the neighborhood see that as it belongs to us. We live here. We grew up here. Our fathers were in this thing. We're just going to take it over. And they've done an incredible job with it.
Yeah, and that was the biggest mistake, New York doing that, bringing in Stanfa, because having someone that just shows they didn't have any understanding of the culture of South Philly, and that was never going to work with Stanfa.
No, and like I said, history repeats itself. History will repeat itself again. It will.
And you had and explain how Nikki Scarfo Jr. Okay, he wanted to take control, but they kind of left him out there where he couldn't really get in, and then he got shot, as we know. And there's rumors about who did that, but we won't talk about that.
No, please no.
Okay, so Nicky Scarfo, how was he involved, and how did they get him out of the way? Between this
from what going on. This is like, I don't think anybody has ever said this, what I'm about to say, and it's probably going to get me in a little tongue lashing, but Nikki was very abrasive with women in South Philadelphia, like hands-on with them, if you kind of know. And a lot of guys did not respect that. And Nikki Jr. was really trying to make a name for himself and live off of his father's reputation. And I think that there was a real effort on his part to try to start moving into areas that he shouldn't have. And that's what leads to him getting shot, is know your role. But I will say this, and let me say this, because if I don't say this, I already know my phone's going to ring. The same people that would tell me about Nikki being hands-on also told me but the guy ain't no rat, and he took a pinch like a man. So there is that respect for like doing time and not talking. But what ultimately ends up happening is after he's shot, Nikki goes to the Lucchese's and begs for them to take him because that'll protect him. It'll insulate him. And that's basically it. That's basically it. But he had designs on starting to bookmake, Shylock, and gambling and all of this. And the guys in South Philly says, "Oh, no. And
but he was another outsider, wasn't he? When you look at, you had
essentially he was, yes. And I think that was realistically, I think that was more of a statement to his father than it really was about him.
Right.
They may not have liked him, but that sends an incredible message to your dad. You're done here, you know?
And do the Young Turks win that war if Stanfa does not get sent to prison?
Oh, yeah. He would have been killed. They'd have killed him. Yeah, they would eventually got him. I mean, the resolve of somebody that doesn't care about life or death either way. I mean, think about it. Who gets a van and cuts portholes and uses a machine gun on an expressway in rush hour traffic? Who does that?
And they shot Stanfa's son in that attack, didn't they?
Neck. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you have so Stanfa gets arrested and he goes away. So at this time, I believe that everybody got arrested and went away.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so nobody was really running the streets until Natali got out. And then Joey decides, how did Joey get Natali out of the way? And one other thing before we go there, explain who the Cingolini brothers were, because that whole dynamic is very sad because they turned on each other. A couple of them were shot. Explain who those guys were first.
I mean, they were both street guys. Just they fell on different sides of the fence. And I think a lot of that had to do with where one thought he could get as far as being on one side or the other. Like, how far can I go? Oh, I'm making more money here. And it's sad to see two brothers like go at each other like that. But that's to me, that's all it was. One was on one side of the fence, one is on the other. And, you know, that's probably one of the more screwed up things, I think, in organized crime history. That, I mean, imagine the father. You know, you got sons that it's just, you know, but a lot of that's just politics. It's just politics.
And the Young Turks made the move first, and the first brother got shot in the restaurant, right?
Correct.
And he became pretty much that he became a cripple. Well, I don't know if disabled. He became disabled after shooting. He got shot several times in the head and survived, which is quite incredible.
On camera of all.
And then they decide they shoot Joey and the other Cingolini. How do you pronounce that last name, Jeff? I don't want to torture.
Cingolini.
Okay, the other Cingolini brother gets killed, and he gets hit by one shot that just happened to hit his heart.
Yeah,
and Joey got hit in the behind and lived. So at that point, it gets real ugly because Joey the Young Turks want their revenge, but then everybody goes to prison, so it kind of slows things down. Then we get to Natali. Natali's out there playing the part. And how do they get Natali out of the way?
They let him just talk. They let him pretend that when you tell the guy, hey, I'm just going to sit back, you're the boss, and then he brings around Previty and all of these other people. Like Natali brought around rats like nonstop, especially with Ron Previty. And if you've ever asked Joey, he'll tell you from day one he knew Previty was bad. First of all, he's an ex-cop. You can't bring an ex-cop into the family like that. That's like against everything. But then again, Previty really was a bullshitter too. Because Previty was just a thief and a meth head. That's all Previty was. All of these stories about money, it was all provided by the feds. And so how they get Natali out of the way is they just let Natali be Natali. I mean, think about just very quickly, the Patrick Bet-David interview. I was so important, I got made twice. Like, really? I killed more people than cancer. I don't think the guy ever killed anybody. And
there's the group of guys. There's the group of guys right there. There's Previty right behind them, right?
Yeah. Everybody. One thing that the guys have told me down in South Philly about Natali, he was good for telling stories. He really was. They told me, see that wall, Jeff? It's blue. If Ralph were here, he'd tell you it was green, and he wouldn't stop talking until you believed it too. Guy was just full of shit. in every stretch of the imagination. They said that his girlfriend was tougher than he was. She used to beat him up in front of everybody. So
and before we jump on to Joey, James, is there anything you want to ask?
No. I think that's, and then we also realized he was, definitely he was a drug dealer. Look at how he got his kids involved in it. Look at how he was trying to pimp out his daughter. It's just horrible stuff.
Yeah. Sleep with this guy. That way I can get the construction jobs.
Yeah.
And he had one, and the guy would get so mad easy during interviews if you asked him wrong question.
Oh yeah. I mean, the best part about, I always listen. I know that you wouldn't now, but I had always hoped. I said, man, I hope Lee can get that guy on his show, just because the look on Patrick Bet-David's face halfway through of, who the hell am I interviewing? And then he was like, oh, and this one wears a wig, and this one's a lackey, and he just hated everybody. And he always
imagine getting together with him and having a few drinks in the bar. Oh my God, he wouldn't shut up.
God.
Yeah, he said that he went that way, that went the rat direction because Joey didn't give him money. Listen, it's not 1940. Guys don't do that. Guys don't do that.
Say that. It's always I was shelved. I didn't get my money. They all say that.
No, he just realized he got used. That's it.
And there were a lot of rats in Philadelphia, but let's remember there were a lot of guys that weren't rats in Philadelphia.
No, absolutely.
Like Merlino and Narducci. Those guys did not rat. They took to prison. Chucky Merlino. They took their time, and Scarfo, the junior took his time. Senior took his time. So you can't say it's like you said, Jeff. It was the younger guys, the outsiders that came in mostly.
Yeah, it was never. It was never a big name guy. Like Leonetti was not a big name guy. He really wasn't. And the reality is I've always said this about Leonetti, because he always gives the excuse of Salvi was my best friend. Well, listen, why don't you just kill your uncle? Just kill your uncle. You can take everything. And I, listen, and Leonetti's weird. He waited till he got sentenced to like 60 years in prison before he goes bad. So I have no clue.
Okay. So Joey comes in, he gets out of prison, and he takes over.
Yep.
So do you think that when he took over, there was kind of a relief in the street? That what do you think the feeling was when he took over at that point? Because the killing seemed to stop at that point.
I mean, there was a little bit of it, but I think for people in Philly, since they've always loved Joey, listen, there's people that love him and there's people that don't. I mean, that's the truth. Not everybody loves him, right? But I think that he brought stability to organized crime in the area. I think from New York's perspective, they kind of just shook their head at it, but because people will make the argument that New York doesn't recognize Philadelphia, and that is not true. They 100% recognize Philadelphia. The difference is Joey doesn't give a shit whether they do or not. And I know you've heard the story where Lucchese boss had wanted to send Lucchese's and they wanted to try to take over Philadelphia. Joey sent a message back saying, go ahead. And they're all going to leave in body bags. Every single one of them. So I think he brought stability. But you still have the Scarfo era guys that are not in favor of that. So you still have kind of a split. Nobody's probably going to say that publicly. You're going to say I'm crazy, but you still have Scarfo era guys that are not aligned with that whatsoever. So you kind of have the same. Remember when I told you history repeats itself? Same sort of situation, I think.
And why would Joey get involved with Bobby Luisi? Because that came back to haunt him too. Do you think that Bobby Luisi paid money to get a button?
Oh, absolutely. That had everything to do. First of all, Joey, I don't know what Bobby Luisi has said, but Bobby didn't meet Joey like one-on-one. Bobby met Joey through somebody else.
Right.
Through 2 other people or 3 other people, right? But Bobby Luisi, first of all, didn't make anywhere near the money he claimed he made. He wasn't very good at what he was doing, right? Because he was chased out of New England. Chased. Nobody wanted him. But the thing is that when you are kicking up a certain percentage of money, that'll get you made pretty quick. I think that did he say, here's 35,000, Joey, make me? I don't know. Would I say that that's in the realm of impossibility? No, I wouldn't say that either. Go ahead. Take his 35 grand.
Well, I think there was a power vacuum in the north end of Boston as well. And so, the Patriarchas seem to be retrenching back into Rhode Island. And, you kind of had that gap there, or a power vacuum. And so, for some reason, Boston could not, New England, they just couldn't maintain it. You remember most of those guys went to jail. And so,
right.
Someone had to come in. And so I believe that Luisi wanted to have someone to provide, make him, I guess, some sort of legitimacy so that he could be protected on the street, I believe.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people too don't realize that Philadelphia and the Patriarchas are insanely tight.
They are.
Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is, which will totally counteract what some informants are saying, the numbers have never been bigger in Philadelphia than they are today. Okay, Philly also has satellite crews in other states.
Right.
So this isn't, so when people say, oh, what do they have, 20 guys? What are they going to do? Listen, they could have 10 guys, but those 10 guys are the wrong ones to mess with. So when people have a tendency to try to demean them, listen, you cannot compare Philadelphia to the Genovese crime family. You just can't. The numbers are totally different. There's totally different rackets involved. But to say that Philly's dead and they don't have... People don't understand. And like I always say, you don't believe me, go down to South Philly for yourself. You'll find out very quick. Very quick.
What would you say to Gene Barillo when he makes fun of Philadelphia and says there was like 4 guys on a corner?
I would say, Gene, go down to South Philly and run your mouth. You won't leave.
That's a good point. I guarantee you wouldn't.
Listen, if you're that tough, go to 9th and Catherine, run your mouth. Go down there and run your mouth outside of a social club or an alleged mob-owned place and see how quick they react.
And Joey becomes well-liked, but he kind of has a John Gotti issue. He becomes very popular, starts dressing nice. He's driving around fancy cars. John Gotti didn't, but at that point, the government, why do you think the government said, we want him and we want him bad?
Because the public likes him. Listen, think about it for a second. If you, me, and James are standing on the corner, Madison Avenue in New York, all right, and we see a guy walk by in a T-shirt and kind of jeans and ratty shoes, we're not going to pay no mind. We see a guy in a $5,000 suit walk by, where are our eyes going to go? And I think when you have that and you're young and you're brash and you do things for the community, it has a way of just aggravating the crap out of the feds. I think some of it's jealousy in a weird kind of way. But if you really look at Joey, they never got him on anything serious. Nothing. Never. So
how much time did he do altogether?
I think it was 14 years. What was it? 14 years to first go around. And then there was the thing for the robbery, which was like 2 years, I think. I would say totaling up probably over 20 years total. And
Joey tells the story that he's sitting in prison and they come to start telling him these new charges about robberies and all this stuff. And so they wanted him. But how do you think they feel now? Now we'll get to Joey to this point. How do you think they feel when they see Joey out there right now? A lot of people, who's very well liked. And he doesn't take no crap from nobody. If you go at him, I would say this to anybody. He's the last guy I'd want to go one day and start saying, and that Lee Cole MFer, I don't ever want to hear those words.
Right. I think it's just a matter of time before we see the feds move again. I'm just going to be real honest. Not that he's doing anything wrong, but when you're speaking out against the feds. I mean, I've had some problems myself doing that, and I'm not him. So I can only imagine, like, every nickel, every dime that they're making, if that is not precisely accounted for, how'd they get Al Capone? Income tax, right? That's what they're going to do. I think the fact that you have George Anastasia and Dave Schratweiser still talking about unsolved murders and putting people's names in that, it doesn't help either. So I think that, listen, you're entitled to do a show. You're entitled to do what you want. But at the same time, don't forget who you are. And that's the biggest thing, is don't forget who you are and what you're alleged to be, because that's just going to bring heat. So I can imagine the feds are watching every show. I can imagine if they can get a wiretap, they're going to try to get that. So they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. Just like they haven't stopped with the Gotti family. They're never going to stop till they get what they want.
And Jeff, James, would you like to ask a question in this area about what's going on currently?
So I just did some research on this. They were calling it the East Coast Mafia Syndicate or whatever. And, when I went in, looked at all of that came from basically John Rubio. And it doesn't look like that really existed in the way that the prosecutors had this overactive imagination, and it was like going to be this 40 made guys of all the 5 families, and Joey and the Genovese guy restaurateur was supposed to be running this thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing how they went to that extreme, and all of them either Joey got found not guilty, and then most of the people were either found not guilty or they pled it down where it wasn't much of anything.
Yeah, Joey was the only one out of all the defendants that fought the case. He got a mistrial based on so not to go into a huge detailed thing, but this you'll find funny is that in order to have a conspiracy, there has to be money exchanged between multiple parties. Now, behind all of this was the medical cream stuff, whatever. So we know how serious the government takes Medicaid fraud, Medicare fraud, and especially opiates. Explain to me how there was not one documented check or payment ever made to Joey Merlino. Okay. Explain to me why in this federal case, remember, it's the East Coast Mafia Enterprise case. There were 30 some doctors involved. Why was not a single doctor arrested, indicted, or lost their license as a result? Not exactly one, or asked to testify. And what it was Gerard Rubio's sort of scheme. And Patsy Perello was caught on tape saying, stay the hell away from Joey Merlino. Don't even go near the guy.
Yeah.
But he does anyway because he gets caught selling drugs. And the feds say, you're going to do X, Y, Z amount of time, but we have an idea. You've met Joey once or twice. Do you think you could go down to Florida and do some business? And of course he says yes. So that's really how it all starts. But there was no connection from A to Z with any of this. And ultimately, remember, the government says we have an open and shut case.
Yeah.
So why is it after a mistrial, they say, hey, Joey, will you plead out the gambling? Yeah, sure. Okay. 18 months done. And the judge is like, wait a minute, you said you had an open and shut case. So once again, it's the spooky people in the background, and that's what they do. And just to reference one point is it's not illegal to be a Mason. It's not illegal to be a Boy Scout, but yet every indictment, James, that you ever read the first 10 pages. It's a dissertation on organized crime.
It's always that. Yeah.
So if you're an American jury, really the only sort of attribute that you have is watching Goodfellas or The Godfather, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they're going home at night going, Joey Merlino Mafia. So I think it's prejudicial to even bring that up, because if it's not illegal to be a member of something, who the hell cares?
Exactly.
But that's
Jeff, this is I was wondering what James dropped yesterday, and then I seen it and I said, damn.
In 2016, the federal government made an announcement they had indicted over 40 members of the 5 crime families of New York and Philly crime family. Allegedly, Patsy Perello, a heavyweight with the Genovese, and Joey Merlino was running an organized criminal organization called the East Coast La Cosa Nostra Enterprise. This made huge headlines at the time, with allegations of illegal gambling, credit card fraud, and Medicare fraud. Much of the government's case was based upon audio recordings from John Rubio, who became an informant. The government invented this new criminal organization so they could charge all those arrested with RICO. People who knew anything about the mob knows that the families have specific rules on how different families interact with one another, and for the most part by 2016, the families did very little together. The case unraveled and most of the defendants either were found not guilty like Joey Merlino, or they pled out to lesser charges. The point is that there was not an East Coast La Cosa Nostra enterprise, and it boiled down to prosecutors with an overactive imagination and a lying informant.
Yeah, I mean, that's the basis of the, James worded that the right way. I mean, they tried to make it seem like a conglomerate of all of these organized crime families working together. Why didn't they drag Florida or Detroit into that? They
Exactly.
But it wasn't. It was simply there was stuff that went on, good, bad, and indifferent. But once again, why was not a single doctor indicted?
Exactly.
And that's the thing, because in order to get the prescriptions, there's receipts of prescriptions. I mean, you see it in these narco trials with prescription drugs. They always have the receipts of the prescriptions. Nothing. And why the hell would Joey Merlino, of all people, knowing who he is or whatever, go see 200 different doctors? They think the feds aren't going to see that?
Exactly.
So it's just a lot of BS. A lot of BS.
And I just want to, first of all, Jeff, there's so much, we can talk 5 hours a day about Philly. I want to thank you for coming here. And I like everybody to know that I'm going to put all your information underneath here with your show. You also have a website. And not only that, people, Jeff has tons of stuff on Philadelphia. I found it myself. I was like, holy shit. Yeah, it's like the research and the names you came up with, and people that say that Jeff Canarsie does not know Joey Merlino. Let me tell you this point.
Never heard of him.
Yes. Joey Merlino told me, yes, I know Jeff Canarsie. Jeff Canarsie came to the trials, and he was there all the time, and we talked, and I knew him. That is from the words of Merlino, people.
We actually, believe it or not, we go back 14 years. I knew him before that, and he's a good guy.
Well, there's some podcasts on here that want to make stuff. Joey Merlino's very easy to get a hold of, people. He's one of those, and he's a rarity. Yeah, he actually answers people, unless if he doesn't like you, he ain't gonna answer you. He's just gonna block you.
Right.
But the fact is, he is very open to the people. He likes to talk to people and treats his people pretty good, especially the people that follow him. And other shows like myself or like Jeff or many shows, they have no trouble getting a hold and getting answers from him. So what do you think about him being here right now, pounding the daylights out of the rats, the informants, and the informants are getting so upset at him? Do you think right now there's this attack where I notice all the informants are starting to do a lot of work together, and they kind of have an agreement to kind of go after Joey? That's what it seems like.
Well, here's the thing, right? So you and me and whoever else, we can attack him all day. Listen, people who like rats are always going to not believe what I have to say. Even if I put paperwork out, they don't care. And those who hate me are always going to say I'm making stuff up, right? So you, me, and others like us are not ever going to get very far with it. But Joey is higher up than any of these people could ever be in their life. They know he's a real person. So his swagger, his sway with the public is much different than mine or yours or anybody else's. So I think it infuriates them because they realize, okay, now we have somebody who is allegedly is, or whatever, who he is. He speaks the truth and his truth carries weight. Do I like him being on social media? No, I don't. I'll be honest with you, but that's just because of my nature being his friend. I don't want to see him get hemmed up in some nonsense, because that's the eventuality. Do I like what he says about the rats? Of course. I love it. I think it's hilarious. But I think that the Rats are going crazy with this because for the first time in history, you have somebody that is not 100 years old, not irrelevant, not a was, maybe is, who knows? None of us really know. And I think he brings validity. He brings validity to what he said.
And you know, and not only that, there's going to be people like Joe Colombo's son, Chris Colombo came out, and they hate him too because there's no, you know, you're not going to see any 302s on him, and you know, there's probably going to be a couple more people that come out. It's going to be interesting to see, Jeff, with these guys getting out of prison now, if they decide to show up on a podcast. But people don't realize when a lot of these guys get out of prison, they have lifetime parole and they can't do shows. So it's going to be interesting to see.
No, I agree with you. And I think, you know, when I first came around a decade ago, it was me and like one rat, right? So it was pretty easy to combat that. Yeah. And then about 3 years ago, how long have you been around, Lee? 3 years?
About 3. It'll be in about 2 months. It'll be 3 years.
Right. All of a sudden, it starts to change. We start to get more mob podcast guys, and I'm like, okay, now I don't have to do this on my own anymore. But then all of a sudden, here comes all the rats, and so it's a level system. And I think the informants are more powerful now than they were, like back when I started, because they're kind of grouping together. But I think Joey just saying what he says deflates them completely. You know.
And James, is there anything you'd like to ask Jeff before we end this?
No. I mean, this was very good. I appreciate you, Jeff, coming on with this. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't talk
really
about
good discussion.
And people, please subscribe, hit the like and reminder bell underneath. If you want to donate to the show, feel free. If not, no problem. Also, Angel Gotti's, we have a Patreon page. You can go over there and join. It's called John Gotti, My Father's Daughter. The link's going to be underneath here. We're going to have a couple links. Whatever Jeff's involved will be under here too. Please go sub. And Jeff, when will you be doing your next live so people can go watch it?
What day is it? Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday night we have a live. We're going to talk about the recent Greek mob hit that just took place, and it's brutal. And we're going to do a live Q&A. We're going to do a new segment called Behind the Headlines, which is basically a headline from the paper, and I'm going to give the actual street version of what happened. But more important than that, I have a video coming out about Paul Castellano and John Gotti and whether or not that murder was sanctioned, because I think people are going to be very surprised about what I know. And I don't think it's apples or oranges. I think when you use sort of street intuition, like a lot of what we discussed today was like street thoughts. You know what I mean? Seeing it from the street's point of view. And I think people are going to be very surprised to find out that there may have been some more people involved in Castellano's rub out than ever before. So we'll see.
And you make a great point, because when Sammy Gravano tells his stories, people use common sense.
Yeah.
He's not Superman. He's not involved with every hit that ever happened. And, very few.
Yeah.
Or policey, same thing. There's certain people out there, they're full of crap. Maybe they, and the shame part, Jeff, is they all had interest in lives, but they want to make their lives that much better.
I know. Come on. They were in organized crime. That's exciting enough. Why do you got to put yourself in every scene of every murder? Come on.
Yeah. And Mr. Policey, if you seen John Gotti from 5 blocks away, you're a lucky man. Okay. With that, I'm going to close it out, people. Thank you very much.
Hey, not a problem.
Jeff, if you can
Thanks, everyone.